Source cred is all about finding ways to measure the value that people create. And this might seem like a kind of simple thing, but we think it's really impactful. Here's a simple example. If you've lived in a house with multiple people, you've probably had the problem where your sink is constantly full of dirty dishes. And I think this is really a problem of recognition. Everyone can see the work that they put into cleaning the dishes, and it's actually pretty hard to see the work that other people put in. So you wind up in this situation where everybody feels like, oh, I'm the only person cleaning any dishes, why am I going to bother? And the result is you have a little bit of a breakdown in the ability to create that value that you actually all do care about, which is cleaning the dishes in this case. But it really extends to a lot of other cases. For example, consider open source. Open source contributions are incredibly valuable, but we don't have a way of measuring it. The usual way that we measure value for people who are doing work is we find out how much we're paying them, and then we get a sense of how much they were worth and how good they should feel about it. But open source is a case where you can create a ton of value and then still be sort of struggling, begging for tips to make rent. So our goal has been to start with a new way of approaching value that is really looking at how contributions are related. So we think it's not really individuals lonely making value, but it's communities. And the communities are connected to each other through their contributions, through their relationships with each other and the way they support each other, and through the values they share. So we started by trying to look at the value that's created in open source. So before coming to this hackathon, we had a prototype. Here it is. And the way it works is basically you analyze an open source repository on GitHub. Let me try and boost up the size a little bit. It analyzes an open source repository on GitHub and identifies which people have been kind of objectively producing value in the repository through their activity. So we find pull requests, we find comments, we find commits, we find that you've authored issues, that you've been referenced by things. But crucially, it's not like a voting system. It's not like counting the amount of activity, but rather looking at how your activity is connected to other work that you've done. So for example, if you author a pull request that is then referenced by a lot of other pull requests or a lot of other issues, or even better yet, referenced by the release notes, then that's a sign that you've created some real value with that pull request. And it gives us a way to start to try to assess within any given community how valuable were the contributions that someone made. And this is in a really decentralized manner because it's not like the maintainer or the CEO comes and says, okay, I give you 5 stars, I give you 4 stars. It's based on a mixture of how everyone in the community interacted with your work. Now, the problem with this is that there's so much value that just doesn't happen on GitHub. Like the value of giving a talk, like the value of supporting a colleague. And so coming into this hackathon, we wanted to find a way to take the same approach of looking at how value is created by networks, but apply it to the whole scope of subjective and human activity. So we built this prototype. SourceCred is built around a plugin architecture because we really want to be able to capture, in the limit, all kinds of value. Whether it's someone picking up litter on the street or the way that a tree supports a community by being a good place to sit under. So we've done a little bit of work with data collection, talking to other teams, and trying to find out what are the contributions people are making, especially the cross-team contributions. And so this is actually kind of this is like a very small initial data set. We have a Google form that's circulating, and then once we get a couple more responses, we're going to have an even richer display. But we can take a look and say, okay, suppose that we value emotional labor. Then we can rerun the algorithm to focus on things that were highly connected to emotional labor. So it turns out if you really value emotional labor, then Griff becomes this super connected node. He's just connected to everyone. He's connected to coordinating that people had orange vests, so they had a sense of community. He's connected to the Giveth meeting that kind of brought a lot of teams together. But then conversely, maybe you're like, okay, emotional labor is all well and good, but really I think that it's design that our communities need to have more of. It's by having more design that we will be able to scale these narratives to a wider audience. Then we can just say, okay, we value design, let's look at what was connected to design. And now we have a really amazing design team. As you can tell, this is, well, I hope you won't mind saying, it's beautiful. It's not a kind of beauty that I could have personally made, but we had some really talented designers like Irene who came and were able to just create this gorgeous mock-up that now is a super easy piece to communicate. And I think that's really part of the promise that we see here is that if we can be good at recognizing things like design, then we'll actually get more of it. Because nobody likes to do something and then feel like it was just kind of unappreciated. As a final note, you might be wondering, okay, this all seems well and nice, I like open source, but this is the Nature 2.0 track, and what does this have to do with nature? And I think actually there's a way in which this becomes profoundly more natural than a lot of our existing power systems. One of the themes on our board here is growing, not scaling. And I think when you have something scaling, it's often you're saying, I'm going to refine this down to the one variable that makes it the most efficient, throw away everything else, and then just I have this efficient thing scale and scale. But you wind up, when you do that, with really hierarchical power structures. You wind up only valuing things that were like transactionally slotting into that particular metric. And I think if you ask questions like, why is it that the people who are really highly connected in like the network of humanity, such as teachers, rewarded so poorly, when people who are, not to hate on investment bankers too much, but you can go and just like be involved in a leveraged buyout and make a ton of money, it's because we're not valuing things on how they're connected to other people and other values. We're valuing them on how close they are to being able to capture the transaction, because money is only able to give credit in terms of transactions. So we think that by building this non-transactional system of recognizing value and then being able to flow rewards, we're going to wind up with a network that looks a lot more like an organic system, where rather than having one CEO who like then controls everything, because you never see that in nature, even the brain, you'll never find a CEO neuron in this head. It's all just the way that everything is connected to the pieces around it. So that's the promise of SourceCred. Thank you for your attention. Any questions you have in the remaining few minutes?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, your demo demonstrates a GitHub repository, I think.
Yeah.
Is it easy to load like real life data? How do you see this?
I'm so glad you asked this question. Yes, you can go to our GitHub repository, sourcecred/sourcecred, easy to remember. And the README just has instructions there. You get your GitHub API key, and then for any open source project you're interested in, you can go and just find, okay, who are the really big participants? Now, I think right now I wouldn't trust it too much because it's missing all this subjective stuff that we just talked about. So to take SourceCred, for example, a lot of people who were really vital to the founding or provided a lot of support to the team members, they're completely missing from it because we haven't gotten to use the Odyssey plugin yet. But so I think that we're really moving towards being able to do a good job of valuing this. And I hope that people, if you're someone who really values open source and you want to support it, in the past, like how do you support a project? Projects don't have bank accounts, you can't like even figure out exactly who should be involved, maybe you can support the maintainer, but now you can kind of discover the whole community that's behind that project. The other thing to note here is that it's really decentralized in the sense that it's not like, we're running a Google and we'll eat your data for you and then tell you the response, but maybe like tweak it so we can serve great ads. The entire system is open source, and it really invites, and I can actually show you, it invites you to kind of ask what would happen with different assumptions. It invites you to just play with it and find what you care about, and I mistyped my password. There we go. So here we have this weight configuration. And so you can say, okay, maybe what I really care about, I think that like pull request reviews, people are just not appreciating enough how much work goes into code review. So I can take up the weight there. And then going even further, maybe you think that there's an entirely new kind of data, a kind of contribution. For example, riffing off the designer example again, maybe you really want to do a better job of recognizing the work your designers do. You don't want to just have to go and say every once in a while, oh yeah, they did some design stuff. You want to actually see it as it's happening. Then you could write a plugin to tools like Figma that designers use, and then it would be kind of like elevated on the same level as coding work.
Is there a DLT underneath?
DLT?
Yeah, distributed ledger technology. Did you take some, or is it just the ideology that it's decentralized?
So it's decentralized. So I think you can achieve decentralization in a couple different ways. You can decentralize something by having a single service that everyone uses that's on a decentralized backend, like Bitcoin. Or you can decentralize something by just having everyone have their entirely own copy of it, like the way that humans are decentralized because we all have our own bodies. SourceCred is the latter kind of decentralization. I would really like to use technologies like IPFS and TrueBit or other systems as they mature. But for ease of iteration, it was just a lot faster to let you own your own data, let you run your own algorithm, and let you get your own results.
We have a question about the next step. So how did you go from here?
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
So I think the next step really is we've gotten so much work, we're starting to get so much data and seeing how people use SourceCred. I want to make this a really easy, really accessible tool for just being able to record the value in shared projects. And I think a lot of this involves changing social norms. We kind of need to invent a new set of social norms, because on the one hand, people could be super self-congratulatory, people could be constantly just like saying, oh yeah, actually that thing over there depended on me, and that thing over there depended on me. And we need to figure out ways as a community that we want to deal with this, and we want to kind of be like, hey, it's great that you have such a good opinion of yourself, but actually this is a little bit out of proportion. And again, we're not going to come up with a rule for everyone and then impose it. It's up to communities to decide. It's also subtle, things like emotional labor. Like if you support someone when they're having a really hard time, maybe it's awkward for you to go and put into a database that, so-and-so was like really like just like having an awful day and like kind of on a bender and like maybe they're actually being a bit of a dick.